See what happens with materials that are small enough to fit through the cell membrane and how the cell has to require very little energy, actually no energy, to be able to do this. It's a process called passive transport. And there are two types, diffusion and osmosis. Let's take a look at what the definition of passive transport is and understand these, how your cells get materials. Types of passive transport. Remember, passive transport requires no energy. Substances flow freely in and out of the cell membrane. In passive transport, substances can go between the membrane without the cell using any energy. This can happen for small vital substances. What are the types of passive transport? Diffusion. Diffusion is when materials move from a high concentration to low concentration. This is because materials like their space. When you see a cloud rising from a factory, that's an example of diffusion, as from the bottom of the cloud you see a high concentration of gas and it spreads out throughout the low concentration in the air. Here's another way of viewing diffusion. Here we take a glass cylinder, one that's empty and the other one is filled with bromine gas. As we release the stopper, bromine gas slowly moves its way into the low concentration in the above tube. This is diffusion. In the cell membrane, you often see particles go through the cell membrane from a higher concentration on the outside of the cell to a lower concentration on the inside of the cell, or vice versa. Example of diffusion: oxygen in the blood. When you breathe in, a high quantity of air enters the lungs. When you breathe in, you're taking in a high amount of oxygen and storing it into the lungs. From there, the blood that's around the lungs, there's a low concentration of oxygen. The low amount of oxygen in the blood creates a gradient for the high in the lungs and the low in the blood. The air is going to want to naturally flow to the blood. The oxygen will move from the high concentration in the lungs to the low concentration in the blood. Oxygen diffuses from the lungs into the blood cells. It's then carried to an area of low concentration in the muscles, and now it will diffuse out of the blood cells as there's a higher concentration in the blood cell. This is diffusion. Osmosis. Osmosis is the diffusion of water across a membrane. Water moving from a high concentration to low concentration across a membrane. Water behaves the same as the other substances, where it'll move from high concentration to low concentration. The key part is it has to be through a membrane until it reaches an equilibrium.